Thank you, Mark and Ray, for your vocals and keyboards, and thank you to our percussionist. Nice addition. My talk today is Losing Shame, Finding Love. And you'll see posted up on the screen, this is a quote from Charles Fillmore, The 12 Powers of Man. The beliefs that you and your ancestors have held in mind have become thought currents so strong that their course in you can be changed only by your resolute decision to entertain them no longer. They will not be turned out unless the ego through whose domain they run decides positively to adopt means of casting them out of the consciousness and at the same time erecting gates that prevent their inflow from external sources. This is done by denial and affirmation. The denial always comes first. This quote is sort of a post, let's call it a signpost for the talk I'm going to give today. We will return to this and you'll see how it fits in with what I'm talking about. The title of my talk is Losing Shame, Finding Love. So first I want to say thank you for being here. I'm grateful for your courage. I mean, who wants to talk about shame, right? It's really almost nobody. And that's what shame's about, right? We don't want to talk about it because we don't talk about it, because it's a secret. If you have had shame, if you have shame, and most of us do have at least some, keep it a secret. You have to protect yourself against exposure, right? At all costs. Exposure of what? Well, you don't want people to see what you suspect may be inside yourself, even though you might not actually look deeply inside yourself. Why not? Well, because you're afraid of what you might find, that your worst fears will be realized. You don't want others to see that you might be unworthy or defective or broken or bad or even evil, that there's something wrong with you, and that all the trauma and bad things that happened to you as a child, they happened because there's something wrong with you. It's an ugly topic. But here's the thing about shame. The only way out is through. So let me change the subject for a moment. And I'll ask you this. Do you love yourself? By love, I mean, do you accept all parts of yourself? Not only accept, but embrace all parts of yourself. The good, the bad, the ugly, the beautiful. Do you love yourself? Can you look in the mirror at your reflection and say, I love you. You are absolutely beautiful. Can you do that? Have you tried? Well, let me be your mirror for a moment. I'll be the mirror. I love you. You are absolutely beautiful. You are, and I can say that. I mean, I'm standing up here, I can see you. I can see that beauty. It's pretty easy for me to say it. How about for you, though? Is it easy for you to say it? All right, then. So, I can say it because I know a secret. That shame is an illusion. It's not real. It's made up. And it came to you probably in childhood, though it certainly could be karmic. And it was really the gift that you never wanted to receive. But most of us were stuck with it. So where'd it come from? Well, usually parents or whoever served as your parents. And sometimes that was overtly. That is, if you were abused, beaten, neglected. That's how parents sometimes pass it on. Or if there was violence in your home, you were criticized a lot. Sometimes, though, parents did a fairly good job, and the shame came more with subtlety. And that is, they modeled their own sense of shame, their self-deprecation, their feelings of unworthiness were modeled. So they might not have dumped it on you overtly, but you grew up seeing it, and we learn from the people that we grew up with who are modeling it for us. But you can also get shame from other family members, from siblings. I've definitely seen lots of cases of older siblings shaming younger ones. From grandparents, aunts and uncles, cousins, sometimes from neighbors. You never know, there's so many opportunities at school, from teachers, but also from friends and from bullies. And hey, it's different today when it comes to bullies, right? I mean, when I was a kid, we didn't have internet. That was in ancient times. And what happened was, if you had to deal with a bully during the day, you could go home and then you'd be safe. It's not like that now because of the internet. All you need is somebody to say some bad things about you, take your picture, post it, and 24/7, it's on you. It's so difficult for children today when it comes to bullying to be shamed like that, to get public shame and humiliation. So as parents, grandparents, we have to watch for that kind of stuff. And for those of us who might be professionals working with children, we have to watch for that kind of stuff. We also get shame from religion. Right now, thousands of people in thousands of Catholic churches are repeating these very words: I am unworthy. If you don't believe me, go to a Catholic Mass. Everyone that I've been to, whether it's for a wedding or a funeral or anything else, they say those words. And in many Protestant churches, we have ministers telling people that they are born sinners, that they have sinful natures. And if they believe in Jesus Christ as their Savior, then they can be saved. But even if they believe, they're still sinful creatures. But you get saved. Of course, this ignores the first chapter in Genesis, which says very clearly, you are born in the image and likeness of God. Author and Episcopal priest Matthew Fox wrote in his book, Original Blessing, that Jesus never heard of original sin, and neither did any Jew of his time. It's something that was made up later. It doesn't exist except in the beliefs of many mainstream and fundamentalist Christians today. Of course, in the realm of unity, we don't believe that stuff. Shame is based on the belief that who I am is wrong. Compare this to guilt that says what I did or didn't do is wrong. Big difference. Shame is the belief and the feeling that we are broken or dirty or despicable, unworthy, less than. Shame is the swampland of the soul, wrote Carl Jung. Toxic shame is the root of all addictions, wrote John Bradshaw in his famous book, Healing the Shame That Binds You. Shame is more than one emotion. It branches off into many different emotions. It can be expressed as depression, anxiety, bitterness, rage, self-doubt, humiliation, embarrassment, perfectionism, resentment, loneliness, alienation, inferiority, superiority, narcissism, contempt, and many other emotional states. I know you think, does a narcissist actually feel shame? It's what drives narcissism. What's the shame about? Because you can never be as good as you think you are. Shame shows up as I'm not good enough. I'm unlovable. I'm a bad person. I am worthless. I'm better than everyone else, or I'm below or beneath everyone else. Shame in children means you're never good enough. You're not good enough to be counted as important, valuable, or to be loved. You're not a real person. In women, shame is about the inability to do it all and to look good doing it. And in men, shame is about being strong, unemotional, a good provider, and successful. And if you show any signs of weakness, such as being emotionally vulnerable, well, then you are not a real man. Sexual shame is very common still. especially for women. In 1947, I know that was a long time ago, and it was before my time, just a little though. Anyway, in 1947, a 16-year-old girl became pregnant. It was 6 months before she could tell her parents about it. In those days, if an unmarried woman or girl became pregnant, it was very shameful. You were shamed. You were embarrassed, humiliated. Of course, it wasn't the same for guys. In the case of this 16-year-old girl, she felt ashamed, but the guy was walking around school bragging about it, even in 1947, because the same rules didn't apply for guys. Anyway, this girl finally told her parents, and she was protected from public humiliation because her father put her in a home for pregnant teenage girls, a Lutheran home. The girl was my mother, and her father, of course, was my grandfather. She gave birth to the boy, the baby that was in her, and that boy was taken away from her, and she had no say in the matter. He was adopted out. To my grandfather's credit, he kind of took over and ran the show back then. He went over to the birth father's home and demanded that he and his family pay for all the birthing costs, which they did. He was stubborn in that way. During her pregnancy, she met a different young man who later became my father. They were married 3 months after the baby's birth. She was then again shielded from public shame because he did what was said back then as he made an honest woman of her, whatever that means. Anyway, he and my mother held the secret of that baby's birth for 50 years. I found out about it. And so I confronted her about it, my mother, gently, of course, and she admitted what had happened. Over the next year, she told my 3 sisters and many of the women she went to church with, and her shame was healed because the secret came out, and she was accepted. And as a bonus, about a year and a half later, she met her long-lost son. And he has been a part of her life ever since, and a part of our lives too. Of course, my sisters and I never shared in that shame. We just accepted him. Although much has changed, and sexual expression is much more open these days. For example, if a teenage girl becomes pregnant today, we throw a shower for her, which is great. But the sexual shame is still there. As long as we have words like slut in our vocabulary, you'll know that most of the sexual shame still it's put on women. I have some experience with shame, different kind. As a child in elementary school, all through my elementary school years, I wet the bed. Not every single night, but quite often. I was told that it was a condition under which I suffered due to an illness I had when I was 3 years old. So it wasn't my fault. So I didn't feel guilt for wetting the bed, but I felt deeply ashamed. What was wrong with me? When I arose each morning, instead of being greeted with, "Good morning," I was greeted with, "Were you dry?" And if I answered yes, then everything went okay. And if I answered no, then I had to listen to a litany of all the extra work that I had caused. So I learned to cope with that as an elementary school child. If I woke up during the night and found my physical body to be wet, then I would strip my bed. I would go down to the bathroom, get a damp cloth and some soap. I would apply it to the sheet around the outer rim of the wet spot to prevent the telltale spot that would be there when it dried, I would put my bedding on the heating vent and my pajamas, and I would spend the rest of the night on the bare mattress. When I awoke in the morning, I would remake the bed, and when I came downstairs and I was greeted with the usual question, "Were you dry?" I would say, "Yes, I was." I lied. Of course, I actually was dry, but it was through my efforts. I didn't like lying. I didn't like the guilt that lying brought, but the shame of admitting what I had done was much worse. So I chose lying. I knew a couple of other boys who had the same problem, but it seemed like it was no big deal in their families. So why was it a big deal in my family? Or at least I thought it was a big deal. I assumed it was because there's something wrong with me. Add this to my conviction that my father didn't like me, and that's a whole other story. And it was, of course, all my fault, not because of anything I did, but because of who I was. Finally, at age 11, when I'm in the 6th grade, my nightly problem ended. I grew beyond it, but the shame did not. That I carried through my teen years and into adulthood. However, during 6th grade, near the end of my episode there, something happened. We were playing this game. Maybe you played it when you were in school. Telephone, where you whisper a message and you whisper to the next person and the next person, and you see how it turns out at the end. So a message was whispered. It came through my ears, and I passed it on. It was benign, inoffensive. By the time it went through about 25 more children and got to the end, the final person had to speak that message. And on that day, the final person said out loud, "Bill wets the bed." I was humiliated, mortified. Everyone was laughing. And I'm sure my face turned red, but other than that, I hid what I felt. And I waited for a very long minute until the originator of the message said, "That's not what I said whatever." And then we moved on, and it was forgotten by everyone there, I'm sure, but not me. But I learned something in that moment. I learned that I could cover up any negative feeling and pretend that I was okay. I could pretend that I felt fine. That's what shame does. It teaches you to hold back, to not be you, out of fear of exposure. Fear that people will find out who you really are. And who was I really? Well, in my mind, I was defective, unacceptable. Shame is insidious. For me, I assumed that people didn't want me or like me. There was this underlying thing. Not in every interaction, but a good part of the time. And when people did love me or like me, want to be around me, I was surprised and sometimes resistant. I became very self-critical. And I lived in a family where accomplishments and positive traits were not acknowledged. Well, except for getting good grades in school, but that was expected rather than acknowledged. And if I acknowledged my own self, well, then I was quickly shamed as a bragger. As is typical in shame-based families, emotions such as anger and hurt were not allowed. I was often told by my father, children are to be seen and not heard. Maybe you heard that. Despite my shame-based identity, I graduated from high school and college. I was married at the age of 21. I fathered 2 children, and I became a professional teacher. Looking back, I know that most of the time when I made a mistake, it triggered shame in me. Shame manifested as defensiveness, sarcasm. I was good at that one, sarcasm. And awkward expressions, self-pity, and sometimes weak body language. I became an expert, though, most of the time, at fake it until you make it. Although I didn't actually make it a lot of the times, but fake it. That is, being able to exhibit confident speech and body language even when I felt inadequate and unworthy. Certainly, I've had many successes in life and times of great joy, yet shame was always there as an unwanted companion. It showed up as I'm not good enough, or I'm unlovable, or I'm a bad person. Over the years, I've worked to let go of those beliefs and feelings, and I let go of most of it. Yeah. I mean, I don't know how much there is altogether. I say 90% of it is gone. I don't have it anymore. But every once in a while, a little feeling pops up. But there's awareness now, and I can spot it for what it is, and I know it's not who I am. I know it's just a feeling. It's something old that's still, a little residue still left there. And so I can accept it. I can embrace it. And I know that it really has no power over me. Just as in Charles Fillmore's saying that you deny it, that it has any power over you. That's what a denial is in unity, is denial that something has any power over you whatsoever. And it doesn't have power. The world always reminds me of what I feel and believe about myself, because when I project shame, feelings of not good enough or unworthiness, it shows up in my work, my relationships, my financial affairs. We draw to us that which is like what we feel and believe about ourselves. It's not just our thoughts. It's what's beneath those thoughts that draws to us. The beliefs, the firm beliefs we have. It's what Fillmore referred to as those, the thought currents that are, but they're unconscious thought currents that are running through us, that are passed on to us. So this doesn't mean that someone who is wealthy, financially rich, doesn't have shame. They certainly may have it in many aspects of life, their relationships, their health, whatever. Or it may be that no matter how much money they have, it's never enough. It's never enough to fill the hole. When I worked as a therapist many years ago, a therapist with families of incest, I learned whole new dimensions of shame. Children were sexually abused by their parents, usually the father, but not always. They were forced or emotionally blackmailed into keeping it a secret. They felt inside that it was wrong, but maybe dad gave them gifts or positive attention. And so this created confusion about what love is. And these children, many of them, grew up and found themselves married to someone who also experienced some kind of sexual abuse in childhood. Sometimes they grew up and became sex addicts. Other times, they just denied themselves sexuality altogether. Men who were abused as boys grew up and became abusers quite often. In the group I had a group of 21 women, and they told me that every one of them had been sexually abused themselves as children, and when they grew up, they married someone who also did that to their children. And every one of the men, who also were in another group, had been sexually abused themselves when they were children. So it's generational. It's what Fillmore's quote says, that it's thought currents so strong that it's like a magnet. It's generational. It gets passed on generation to generation. It doesn't have to be that way, though. But the shame is like a magnet and causes people to be like that. Because when we're children, we have no real defenses. We're defenseless. We have no ego defenses in the first, say, 8 years of life. Whatever comes to us, we just believe it. We're extremely vulnerable. And so impressions are made then. And of many of the things we have to spend our whole lives dealing with and letting go of were given to us when we had no defense. And so they're in us. They're in us mentally. They're in us physiologically. So it's work. So I will say this to all of you. If you were the victim of sexual abuse, it was not your fault. It's not about who you are. Whoever abused you was projecting their own shame on you, using you to cover their shame or to feed their addiction or to cover up their own self-loathing. You were the object of their addiction. Healing from childhood abuse and trauma begins with recognizing your innocence you were innocent. Even if you were an adult and you were abused in some way, you're innocent. And so we have to give ourselves, you have to give yourself the love that you missed as a child or during that situation. And healing from addictions is the same. Remembering John Bradshaw's quote I offered earlier, toxic shame is the source of all addictions. You have to deal with how you feel. To become aware of your negative feelings, face them, feel them, experience them. You need to accept it as what you are feeling in this moment, as part of you. Accept it without judging or resisting it. If you sit with it, you'll realize that it's just a feeling. You could be totally overwhelmed with a certain feeling, but it's still just a feeling. If you can step outside and observe yourself, you can accept it. Feel it, but also as the observer say, it's just a feeling, I'm going to sit with this. I'm going to be with this for right now, because it has no power over me. A denial right there. And so you let it run its course. It's like if you saw a child hurting, you would comfort that child. So comfort the inner child in you when something comes up. You don't need to fix yourself. You don't need to make yourself be different. Self-improvement is a lie. You don't need to, quote unquote, improve yourself. What you need is to love yourself, because that's what's been missing. And love is the antidote to shame. All right. As you embrace all parts of yourself, know that God, as love, is embracing you. Allow yourself to feel this love, this embrace. Surrender whatever need that you might have to demean yourself, and surrender into the embrace of unconditional love. It's yours, always, every moment. And know that shame is more complicated than feeling bad about yourself. Shame is a multi-tentacled monster. It reaches into all parts of your life, often turning what hurts into negative emotions that endanger you and others. Shame becomes depression, apathy, self-loathing, hatred, resentment. It can become rage. It can become all kinds of negative stuff. And if you reject it, then shame turns on you, destroying you from the inside out. If you project it, shame slings contempt, sarcasm, and violence at other people and at the world. So the idea is to accept that it's there, that it's part of you at the moment, but it's not who you are. So what do we do going forward? Well, I have 5 ideas. I know 5 is a big number for things to remember. But the first one is to feel what you feel without judgment. Stop judging yourself. Because when you judge yourself, you are shaming yourself. And then stop hiding what you feel. That doesn't mean you have to go around telling everybody what you're feeling, but it means you need to tell yourself what you're feeling. You have to acknowledge it. And if you have a relationship with someone, it's okay to tell them, as opposed to flinging it at them, to tell them that you're angry or you're sad or whatever it might be. It's okay. And accept whatever you feel at any given moment and embrace it. Embrace yourself as you are right now. If you're hurting, embrace yourself. You are okay. It's just a feeling that you're going through. When you make a commitment to move forward spiritually, all the stuff comes up that's in your way. All the stuff that's been holding you back. Some people start doing affirmations and prayers, and maybe at first they have a little success, but then it all hits the fan because the stuff in you has got to be healed so that you can move forward. So let it come up. Embrace it. Embrace yourself exactly as you are right now and know that you live in God's loving embrace. The same goes for your relationships with others. Accept what others feel. Let people have their emotions and feelings. You don't need to try to control them. Stop shaming people who disagree with you. You still have boundaries, of course. You don't let people walk on you, but stop shaming people. You know what? If somebody has a different political view or religious view or medical view than you, then let it be. You can speak your view, but you don't have to shame them, put them down for how they feel. They feel how they feel. Be curious instead of shameful. The other thing to do is to ask yourself what you want. What do you want? And then align your thoughts and behaviors and your feelings with that. What triggers shame is when we are saying and doing things that violate our own intentions and values. People do that all the time. Be who you are authentically. So in order to be authentic, you have to ask yourself, what do I want? What do I want to come of this life I'm living? What's important to me? And then live within the context of that. Stop doing all the stuff that conflicts with it, because that's feeding the shame. Be you, in other words. Shame says, don't be you. I'm saying be you. Find out who you are, then be you. People, the world, will pressure you not to be you, but be you. And then last, this is the fifth one, practice liking and loving the person in the mirror, exactly as you are right now. And know this, that we all need help and support at different times. Therapists, energy healers, spiritual counselors, whatever it may be, let your intuition guide you toward the right kind of help. Make sure your helper, therapist, counselor, whatever, has been doing their own work. Because if they haven't done their own work, they're just going to be projecting their shame on you. And as we get older, it can be more difficult, because if you're 70, you're probably not going to find a 30-year-old therapist, right? You want someone who's lived some more life and can relate to where you are. So be very picky about who you might choose as your helper. But we all need help at one time or another, so don't be afraid to ask for it. Shame is an illusion, and love is not. You lose shame by feeling it. You find love by feeling your negative emotions and accepting both them and yourself without judgment. Love begins with acceptance and then embracing. And by embracing what you feel in all parts of you, you are in a state of love. So let me remind you once more, I love you. You are unimaginably beautiful. You are absolutely beautiful. Beyond all illusion of shame, I say to you, namaste, and thank you.